You had some difficulties with the name of the band.
Yeah, because the record company that finally signed us didn't want to sign a contract with a group called the Mothers.
Why?
Because, do you want the real reason or you want a television reason?
No, not real.
In the United States, the term mother is short for motherfucker. And the term motherfucker can be used a variety of ways. One way it means somebody who stuffs it up their mother, and another way it means a musician who is supposedly good on his instrument. And at the time, in the place where we were working, all the guys who were in the group were the best available in Pomona. Does that give you a rough idea of how sad it was in Pomona in those days? So I thought we should call the group the Mothers, which is, as I explained, short for that other word. So the record company said, no, you'll never be able to sell any records like that. And they said, if you don't change the name of the group, we're not going to give you a contract. And they wanted to call it the Mothers Auxiliary, which is a name that is usually attached to parent organizations in the States. So I said, no, out of necessity, we will become the Mothers of Invention.
Later.
That's right. And that's where it came from.
The Turtles had come full circle. We broke up in about 1967. Everything was starting to kind of have problems, business problems, that were causing us to begin working in other avenues. Animation was one of them that we wrote a song for, an extra song for a movie somewhere down the line before Dirty Duck. We were already sort of pushing things around in the field of film and visual and those kind of things. We did a movie with John Wayne's son, and he wrote some crazy cowboy movie, and we did a couple of songs. We had already kind of started pushing around things with Frank. We started doing some singing with Frank. Frank asked us if we'd like to tour with him. We said sure. I mean, we would if it worked out financially that we could do it, because we were learning that to own yourself was kind of an interesting form that we kind of weren't allowed to be a part of in the beginning parts of things. It's very theatrical stuff. I say theatrical because there was no time frame to it. It was like it all kind of just happened and kept happening. Billy the Mountain. Billy was a mountain and Ethel was a tree that grew off of his shoulders. Billy was a mountain. Ethel was a tree growing off of his shoulder. Very dramatic stuff. Frank always was like very dramatic. There's a lot of things that pile on at that point, and that was the story of 200 Motels, was life on the road. Member of the band wanted to quit. We flew to England to do the record, to do the movie. It was done by a full orchestra, probably 50 musicians who Frank wrote a score for 50 musicians. And we wrote all the rock and roll songs with Frank, brought along all of the musicians that he wanted to have involved, who weren't necessarily in the touring band, but were in Frank's eyes as a part of the musical concept that he was looking for with 200 Motel. The Mothers of Invention at that time were Ainsley and me and Howard and Frank and George Duke and a few other people. But at the same time, there were people like Jimmy Carl Black, people who were part of the original Frank Zappa band who were not on the touring business that we were in. It was kind of a really weird setup because we were hired to be Frank's live performing group, but we also tried to have a a piece of the action as, having something to say about the creativeness. When you're there doing it, it just seemed like it was our movie. And when Frank Zappa would advertise it, it would reach 250, 300 people were now involved in it in terms of, it wasn't just a record album, it was a record album and a movie record album. And these dimensions kept growing and kept giving us something to write about. We had to kind of answer to everything because when you're there and you're under the visual of this movie studio, I mean, it's crazy what I'm even hearing me telling you is that it was no real plan to it. It just kind of all dissolved and then was reborn. Yeah, we'll do the movie, but what's the ownership of the movie? I mean, who do I answer to? It wasn't a live show. It was Frank writing this movie. It was always really wild. However you put it, it was an art form all unto itself. To us, it was Chuck's movie, not Frank's movie. Frank was going to do Frank, but for 200 Motels. The animation in 200 Motels was Chuck Swenson and Murakami, Jimmy Murakami. All of us were all kind of getting together daily and just finding the way to get it to the end of the day. They brought in a director to kind of put the cap on the top to stop it from erupting, because if you left those guys alone, it took off in whole other new directions every time. A lot of that was being discussed as it was happening. So weren't really in the concepts of it all. We weren't really planning enough to be smart enough to do that. Frank wrote a lot of music, and we saw how it could work. Went on the road for months touring. What a drag, you gotta go. That's all Frank Zappa. And that's 200 Motels is this. Went on the road for there's all kinds of parallel melodies and things that go on and on. And no, we didn't really ever think that was what it was going to end out. We took that as everything became part of the whole story became part of what's happening. Bass guitar player quit the first day we got to London. He didn't want to do the album because the album and the music and the movie demonstrated that he wanted out. And the story and the script took on a reality that never was thought about, which was the guy who played bass guitar quit the band the very first day we were in London. We needed to find a musician, first of all, who could play the music of Frank Zappa. When the guy quit the group, that sent Frank reeling in my vision. The thing I remember most was Frank, the guy from the band, coming into the rehearsal hall and saying to all of us, I don't want to do this movie. And I remember Frank said, why? To Jeffrey Simmons, he said, why? He says, this isn't what I joined this band for. I joined this band to make Frank Zappa music, Mother's music. I didn't want to do this other thing that you're making me do. That was Jeff's point, was that Frank was always making us do these things because he had no end result. I think there's no real core belief that there's an end result to all of this. It's just, it'll go as long as it takes to get it out there. 200 Motels was like that. I mean, we did it in 1 week. Man, have you ever known a motion picture that was going to be done in 1 week? And he had Tony Palmer to direct his portion of the movie. And Tony Palmer was a very successful director and producer of his own in England. So everybody was just kind of sporadic. It was entertaining because We got paid to do it. We just wished it had all finished off a little different. The fire in Montreux, that changed a lot. And that was Frank blaming himself. I mean, he really did. He really, he purposely wrote on the end result was that he had all of these people waiting to make this movie, but he had nobody to talk the words of Jeff Simmons. Jeff Simmons flew back to California when he quit the tour. Just never finished off the way it should have. It lies in this kind of state of limbo. That in itself is a history all by itself. That those songs that we did for that movie and went on the road for a month touring. What a drag. You got to go. Even if you want to be at home, flaked out in Hollywood. Drove to Inglewood and then we dumped all our shit and took a plane across the sea. Chicken, beef, or turkey. There's no point to it all. It's just a bunch of great sounding music. If you're a Frank Zappa fan, it's probably one of the 2 or 3 best albums Frank ever did. 200 Motels. Or if you are really carefully how you use the language, it was probably as many bad people, reviews as good. Because it was not a commercial movie. It was never planned out to be a commercial sellable movie. Frank didn't do things like that. He wanted to always be go the extra mile. So 200 Motels wrapped around 200 ducks, the Dirty Duck. It's just amazing how in parallel lives they're both kind of moving. The Dirty Duck and then Flo and Eddie and then Zappa. It's all waiting to be unearthed. It's kind of like one of those movies with Harrison Ford. Where they're searching for the lost treasure. 200 Motels in itself was a really, really interesting sidebar to our lives. Because it gave us the chance to be the lead singers of the Mothers of Invention. And that's what we were looking to do, is learn how to become better singers. And that's why we left high school to play in a rock and roll band. And Frank's purpose, 200 Motel, live at the Fillmore East. You can't do that on stage anymore. 200 Motels led us right back to the Dirty Duck as a part of the whole mishigas that was kind of taking place. Chuck was working on 200 Motels, and Murakami Wolf Swenson were the company that kind of began to play around with Frank. They had decided they wanted to do an animated moment, the business of the animation to come to life around Chuck's visual antics that he had brought to the forefront for all of us to look at, and everybody decided it'd be a good idea to try and do it. There wasn't a whole lot of shape to it at the time. At the time, it was a segment of a feature film called 200 Motels. Frank was involved with us. Howard and I were doing mostly the songs for the movie. There was a lot there, with the screenplay for 200 Motels was all written. Animation was designed for a specific part of the movie. At that point, when we got involved, it was taking off in a lot of different directions. The visual ownership, since it was going to be made a motion picture, 200 Motels was already in its own way owned and represented to the world as 200 Motels, and Frank owned 200 Motels, and I don't think there was ever any thought that it was going to go beyond the business of animated motion picture. It's because of the ownership through the fact that the movie company kind of takes on the role of owner, United Artists. I'm sure if it came up today that they would want to, pull it out and they'd have to clean everything up. If I wanted to release the music as a sidebar to everything else, we'd probably have to negotiate the deal with United Artists. With that came the story of Flo and Eddie. The movie kind of parallels the story of that particular adventure, which was the Flo and Eddie having to lose its name to eventually getting it back. Lawsuits, and we learned a lot about the business at hand, but at the same time, there was a lot going on that you just didn't understand. That had to do with they owned the characters in the movie were owned by the people who paid for the movie. We got a piece of the action as writers and producers of the music score, and the actual film itself. 200 Motels was a quirky feature film, but it was Frank Zappa. We liked Frank a lot. We just didn't want to be related to the history of Frank doing the kind of zaniness that we stayed with Frank up until his being pushed into the orchestra pit. It didn't feel very good about going forward doing anything. Frank didn't want to do anything. He thought that he had bad karma. He cut us off. Those two projects, that kind of 200 Motels and Billy the Mountain. Billy the Mountain was an extravagant project that Frank was working on that was going to be Billy the Mountain, an animation featurette. We never know where that would have come because we wouldn't have had the fall in the theater where the guy pushed Frank into the orchestra pit. That changed everything. That wasn't supposed to happen. We're just doing music and singing goofy songs and stuff, and there was no way to get out of it. Frank was pushed. He almost was killed by that guy. Why did he do it? Because his girlfriend was in love with Frank. And I mean, Frank's not a very handsome man. He's a unique individual. But who's pushing the buttons to send Frank into an orchestra pit? That was a bad time in the life of a rock and roll band. We have had a few of those things, and maybe that's the way it is. You have this thing, this 200 Motels. Well, that was Frank's ability to drop us into the score that he was already pushing around. There was a ton of albums that Frank Zappa put out. Frank didn't perform to be on sale. Frank was really he did Frank. Whatever it was he was told to do, he was really good at being able to pull it off. And he brought us into it because he couldn't sing it. And he needed us to perform the sound of the voices. And that was one of the things that we liked because it taught us to become better singers. It eased everything, having the parallel thing kind of going on. We were able to kind of point at it and say, see, there's the crazy side, and here's the not so crazy side. They're not really that far off. I mean, I kind of remember when we started out in high school with the Crossfires, which became the Turtles, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The Crossfires was our surfing band, which was 90% of it was instrumental. And we weren't even using our voices really yet. Well, we wanted to kind of stamp the name Flo and Eddie on everything. We wanted Flo and Eddie Incorporated became part of our relationship going towards animation, television. we were writing at CBS, writing. We had a job writing comedy, in Los Angeles. Howard and I were trying to be in every place at the same time and doing a bunch of things. A lot of the stuff that coexists with all of what we're talking about is the fact that we were cutting songs along the way, writing original songs, writing Strawberry Shortcake, the Care Bears, all this kind of wild, wacky stuff that we addressed as Flo and Eddie. Flo and Eddie were a couple of really wild ass guys in that period of time doing children's music and everything else that we could. We went and did a reggae album. We did all of those natural byproduct, organic things that we were doing, hoping to strike gold by finding one of the ways they'd work. It's interesting that you bring out the fact that our ballad singing became kind of what the You're a Lady, the songs from the Flo and Eddie albums that were straight for the radio. I mean, we wanted to kind of capture a period of time in our life. We weren't great songwriters. We were okay songwriters. It's also kind of a crossover between the Dirty Duck, 200 Motels, Live at the Fillmore East. The ultimate thing was at that point in time, we didn't really know what the outcome would be. I don't think we were sitting around dreaming about doing any animated feature, but financially it came at a good time. We were able to sit down and compose and work on the music and the story with Chuck. He came to us and saying, how would you feel about voicing Willard and the Duck? We thought that'd be fun for us to do. I mean, here we were kind of looking for things to do, to be involved in craziness of sorts, and there it was. You had to see it for what it was really about, which was just having it moving was enough. Just it wasn't. Listen, he came to us and said, I'm going to pay you $10,000. Well, there's no money in what we were doing. It was totally unbelievably cheap. No one ever came to us about the fact that it was probably a bit of an art project, that we were just kind of left alone to our own devices. A bunch of Flo and Eddie songs that grew. It was all different to us as well. We wanted to put the songs that we had, those songs came as a byproduct of the Dirty Duck. Some Mystic Martha.
Please, call me Martha.
Living in the Jungle. Those things were available because we wrote them. We purposely wrote them with us as the artists. It gave us an extension of the program, which would become 200 Motels, Life on the Road. I mean, whatever you look at it in the Dirty Duck, it's shocking stuff for Chuck. When I think back to Chuck, no one was slowing him down.
Now this is a cheap little movie, and I am a cheap little guy.
We're going to abuse your eardrums, and we're going to make fun of your eyes. This whole concert is a great big hunk of shit. We're glad to be working and proud to be a part of it. And that's what it was for me and Howard. It was the classic, we got to do what we wanted, which was to make that record. It's great to have work in a movie. It was fun. Well, when we double used it, we used that song. It's a great movie, but it was a great little tour. We would sing whatever we were using. Cheap became our piece of art. Now, this is a cheap little movie, and we are cheap little guys, and we're going to make fun of you. And you're going to like it or not. We're going to make fun of you, and we'll tell you right to your face. We were dealing in a couple of realities, like listening to things like I pulled out what I could hear of, like living in the jungle. I mean, there's some pretty strong stuff in there. And the language was one thing, but the idea was the other. I think the idea, we were just writing the song, flying by the seat of our pants. I don't think we knew the transcendental or the trans facts that it became with the female and the roles of the duck and Willard and the characters that they kind of lead us into this movie. Is pretty scary that any of us were able to I mean, we did that, perform that live. Cheap opened our show for years. And this is a cheap little concert, was Flo and Eddie stepping out and saying, we're going to make fun of you and you're going to like it because you like us. And we always just thought, we better get out of here before they realized that they had to pay. That was sort of always the keynote. Will it take us to the next project? It was always like that. Yeah, we never did a soundtrack. I have a bunch of material that would have been used as soundtrack material. We didn't want to lose the ownership of the songs. And that was a big deal for me and Howard. Everybody was involved in bringing this to a head with the different animators and Chuck Swenson and all the things that came from that part. And then there was the other side of things. It just was happening all so fast. There is no doubt about that. Several members of the Mothers of Invention playing with us on that. There's a whole album of material, probably upwards of about 20 songs, that would include the stuff from Dirty Duck and the stuff from all of the other little pieces that we pick up. There were only a couple that we didn't finish off. I don't have any tapes of that unless they're in a locker that we own. I'd be surprised if they're already in the own way. Some of them have probably been exposed and used. I mean, I'm not sure. Well, we never did anything behind deals. There was no soundtracks. No deals were ever made for soundtracks or anything like that. Would I like to put it together? I mean, I've put together as much as I could without. I mean, most of the stuff was done in 8 to 16 track form. And a lot of that stuff is just like one and done kind of stuff that we were possibly going to put out someday or not put out someday. The self-realization is it's not a huge marketplace for it. I mean, I know there's an artistic form to it, but I'm not sure. Record companies don't do things as a hobby. You take an album like 200 Motels with this beautiful, commitment of color and shape and everything else that goes on. It's fantastic. And you can't do those kind of things today. Frank was dealing with that all the time. Everything we were doing as this was our career, and we were trying to struggle through the animation part of our lives to get to the TV part, where we ended up having the Flo and Eddie television show for CBS television, late night TV comedy and our guest stars were Kiss, and we had a whole nother life going on. We just always treated it as part of our musical history now. Chuck was wonderful to work with, and he helped us so many ways, to just perpetuate, keep it going. I mean, I think we would both say we really enjoyed what we were doing with that project, and that was a lot of that was tied together with Chuck. Chuck, sort of opened the door and say, "Do what you want to do." Important for us to have support like that because we unfortunately ran into, you run into doors closing in front of you all the way with things like that because you just don't know what you're doing. I mean, other people have crossed over there, so we know it can be done. It's a lot of work. Whatever you do with the Flo and Eddie stuff, it's a lot of work. I mean, it just needs to be formulated with pulling someone together who could direct the project to a finished point,
Strawberry shortcake, wouldn't you know?
Strawberry Shortcake was a totally different thing. It just happened to fit the concept amazingly as a byproduct of the animation business with Chuck. He always came to us to do things, and one of them was Strawberry Shortcake. He had an opportunity to get involved with the tiny world of Strawberry Shortcake, parallel things that were going on with the kids' songs, and we were purposely hopefully we were writing songs that were beyond what we had kind of owned up to, because they were they weren't nasty. Strawberry Shortcake was not a nasty thing, but Frank did anything he could to keep the mothers involved with the nastiness. Strawberry Shortcake had a foundation. We ended up doing something like 15 or 16 records as Strawberry Shortcake. Flo and Eddie did the music for. We had a Christmas album. We had all kinds of wacky albums that came. Dance album. We had a dance album with Strawberry Shortcake. And this is very funny stuff looking back at what we were doing. They paid us to make records for Strawberry Shortcake and the Purple Pie Man. We had our own little industry going on, which was these 15 or 16 Strawberry Shortcake records that they were doing on the side and putting out, maybe pressing 100,000. Romeo Mueller is another part of this puzzle. Romeo Mueller was famous for doing the voices of animation characters, namely Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Santa Claus and those things. And Howard and I were on the outskirts of that. Just like we had done with Strawberry Shortcake, Chuck Swenson brought us in to do the song for Ray Bolger animation project. And we did the Ray Bolger animation. It's a wonderment. It's a wonderment.
Sings a wonderment. It sings a cheer. It sings that happiness at last is here. And what I'm singing now, you can sing too.
Wonderment was Easter. You had to cover all the different times of the year. So the Wonderment was a Ray Bolger project, and Ray Bolger did the voice of Peter Paws and Peter Paz was the colors of the characters in the show. Peter Paz was Peter the Magical Rabbit. There were a couple of songs in The American Rabbit. The greatest hits of Flo and Eddie are strewn hither and thither throughout the career of animated projects. I like what it is. I mean, I'm not sure what it is, but I like to be able to be a little bit more in control. By not being successful, I don't have to live up to anything. But I got a nice career. I just did 51 concerts out on the road. And the year before that, I did 61 shows. I mean, those shows are extremely hard to do, and the business of those tours is now 16 years straight. We've taken the Happy Together tour out on the road, and that says a lot about what we do best. Our part of it is our show, our live show. I don't think it just will wind up itself and not somewhere along the way be able to go, oh my, there was something just ran by. It was their life career or something like that. I mean, I talk to Howard and we talk about doing things every once in a while that it's just too hard. It's just industry is packed full of logistics that make it hard. I got to kind of walk on the shoulders of people that I really, enjoyed meeting and working with. When we, did crazy stuff got to do some crazy stuff with John Lennon, and got to do some crazy stuff with Mark Bolan, T-Rex. I mean, the stuff we were doing with T-Rex would end up being his life and death when we did the album with Keith Moon. Everybody knew it wasn't going to be a hit album, so you had to be forgiving about things. He couldn't sing, but we made an album out of it, and they had to record it twice because the record company, the story that goes wavy gravy on us is this thing that of the lifeblood of a tour like that, the lifeblood of a movie like that, all of those things. That's what Howard and I were dealing with through all of this, was that kind of zaniness that came from doing these things with Frank. It's like Live at Carnegie Hall. They just put out an album of 6 CDs of Frank at Live at Carnegie Hall doing the White Album or something. I think last year it came out, and they just couldn't keep putting stuff out. It's all one of those things where the art form becomes a magnificent pastiche of some good music, some not so good music, but you still did it. Howard and I always saw, we've stayed friends because of the stuff we just committed wholeheartedly to just doing this kind of crazy life of all these different things. But it's the thing that we found most comfortable in being able to create, was to give us the latitude, to give us a story idea, we'll fill out the gaps, that was the thing. So, but I should go now. We were instrumental in taking a lot of people down with us.